I literally used to think that like big ideas was like the big Don Draper moment where you get up and you pitch this big thing and everybody's just so in awe of like how incredibly eloquent you are and how gorgeous this idea is that they just buy it in the room. And the truth is, if you want to sell big ideas or you want your career to grow and you want to go to great places, the people around you need to be bought into you, not just your ideas.
You're listening to Campaign Brief, presented by Wondertree Media. I'm CJ Thomas, and I'm sitting down with marketing industry leaders to hear their stories, strategies, and lessons learned that you can use to stand out and grow your brand. Hey everyone, in this episode, I sit down with Seth Odell. Seth is the Vice-Chancellor of Marketing at the National University System. While at National University, Seth has built an in-house agency model from essentially 0 to 70 people in the course of just over a year. So I think you're really gonna get a lot out of this episode. Seth is full of marketing and leadership wisdom. We get into things like how do you sell big ideas, whether it's to the client, to your boss, or even fellow team members. We also dive into his process for developing great campaigns and just learn from his experience in building this in-house agency. So I hope you enjoy this episode with Seth Odell. One thing that I think would be cool to start with.
Sure.
I know that you started your marketing career in video as well. So do you want to kind of give us a little bit of background there and how did that take you into where you're at now?
Yeah, absolutely. So coming out of college, I worked in TV news for a year and at ABC News in their Albany, New York branch. Made my way out to LA and I found myself working at UCLA in like an entry-level media relations job. Mm-hmm. And it was at that job really early on that my boss had asked me if I knew Final Cut Pro. And I lied and told her I did. I'd come up on Avid and figured out how to use it and like became the video guy at UCLA.
Did you go to YouTube University on that one?
Yeah, like it was basically like I went online and figured out how to use Final Cut Pro and Googled it and like taught myself literally over a weekend and went in and like overnight became, for UCLA, which is a huge organization, 30,000 employees, I became like the video guy in marketing and shot 300 videos over the course of 3 years. And the most amazing part was I got access. When you work in production, you get access to people that you normally wouldn't. So I sat down with Coach John Wooden, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, General Wesley Clark, UN Secretary Ban Ki-moon, like amazing people that I really had no qualifications to talk to.
Oh, wow.
And I found myself sitting down with them and shooting videos, and so it's been an awesome experience, and that opened up really all the doors for my career was starting in that video role at UCLA.
Yeah, and I think that's really cool because one of the things that you mentioned in your keynote with that story is just the power of saying yes. And I mean, I know you emphasize that a lot. What does that kind of mean to you, and how did you get there?
Yeah, it's really important that, to me, the mentality of saying yes professionally is huge. People are always looking for new opportunities and chances to grow, but the reality is that opportunity is rarely created. It's often just discovered, and it comes to you. And so to me, it's about how you react to those things around you and what you kind of put out in the universe. And so for me, saying yes to my boss and helping her on one video project turned into me becoming the video guy, turned into me becoming a marketer, really from media relations, coming from media. And all of a sudden, it opened up my whole career path. And so on one end, it's because you never know what's going to come back, and so put out those things. But the other part that's like really critical is if you want to sell big ideas or you want your career to grow and you want to go to great places, the people around you need to be bought into you, not just your ideas. And people buy into the people that help them. And so like the best thing you can do is say yes to the needs of those around you. So if you can help your boss or your colleague or your peers and provide them value, they'll come through for you. And so for my boss at UCLA, I mean, she gave me air cover when I screwed up. She opened doors for me when I had, big ideas and helped pass things through. And all of that came because our relationship was built on the idea that like when she needed me, I was there.
I love that. And that emphasis on having people buying into you, to buy into your ideas. And I think that that's such a cool point because that applies not just to those around you, but even if you're working with clients or like you said, it's your boss, your team, like everyone needs to kind of be bought into you before they're going to get bought into your idea.
Yeah. Big ideas are about so much more than the ideas themselves. I was a really idealistic, young guy coming up professionally, and I really thought that it was all about the caliber of the idea. And if the idea was good enough, that's all that mattered. But the reality is that there's like so much more to it. And like one of those things is that like big ideas are risky, and risk requires trust, and it's uncomfortable, and it's about people. And so, being reliable and coming through for people and driving value and doing all that first, and then making the asks that you have for your ideas was a lesson I kind of just stumbled into and learned, which I'm really grateful that I did.
And was there kind of a moment where that really clicked for you? Was there an instance, like a particular story where you maybe saw the other side of that, where you were maybe a little too focused on the idea, or is there something that comes to mind where it was
So pretty early out of my time at UCLA, I was riding the high of being the new video guy, and I was shooting all these great videos, and they had this committee designed to help pick a virtual campus tour. So if you've ever been to like a college website, they have these tours where you can go click through campus, and it's like a video experience, and you can experience campus online. And the committee was trying to pick between two vendors, one that cost like $100,000, the other cost $150,000. And they put me on the committee. And first at the time I was honored because I didn't realize how committees normally work, and I thought it was great. And instead of going and like listening and like supporting and seeing where I can provide value, I came up with this big idea that we should do a YouTube campus tour with YouTube annotations, which had just come out, which was like the technology that lets you click within a video and navigate to another video, and create this like totally customizable choose your own adventure campus tour. So I went out and shot a full demo of this thing and like built it, and I went and like interrupted the meeting, first agenda point, and just like pitched it. And it was such a bomb because they're like, who is this kid and what are you doing? And like, they didn't even hear the idea because they were just like so bothered by the fact that I was like, so, just boisterous and so full of hubris that I would like, just like think that I could solve this thing. And, that was one of the hardest lessons I learned early in my career. They kicked me off the committee. They ghosted me. They didn't even tell me they kicked me off. They just like stopped sending me invites, and which was painful enough. And it took me a long time to realize that like it wasn't the fact that the idea was good or bad. It was entirely about how I went about it, and that there's this like whole world to getting shit done and selling big ideas, and it's way more complicated than just like the caliber of the idea itself. And that was a real sobering lesson for me.
So what do you think it is then? I mean, you mentioned providing value, but let's unpack that. How do you actually build the trust among the people around you, so that way when you do come in with that big idea, everyone's kind of all ears?
Totally. There's a few ways. One is that reliability of being dependable and showing up and getting the job done and kind of like covering the bases. That's one piece. The other piece is getting beyond the surface level professional relationship and getting a little bit friendly with people. It's not about being friends with everybody at work, but it is about like knowing, the names of the kids of your colleagues, and knowing their children's names, and knowing that Billy's got, Little League coming up, and like being a human being, and like, getting a fuller picture of people. And then the other one is like one of the best lessons anywhere in work ever is like no surprises. And so one of those, everybody learns that with their boss, is like, hey, don't let your boss get caught off guard. But when it comes to big ideas, it's not just the boss. Like I could have shopped that idea before the committee meeting and gotten people excited about it and found a way to bring it up. Instead, I showed up and nobody knew what was going on. And like I literally used to think that like big ideas was like the big Don Draper moment where you get up and you pitch this big thing, and everybody's just so in awe of like how incredibly eloquent you are and how gorgeous this idea is that they just buy it in the room. And the truth is, Lawrence Lockman, who was the head of UCLA's communications division at the time, who I worked for, he would tell me years later, he said, if you're in the room pitching your big idea for the first time and it's the first time they're hearing it, you've already lost.
Wow.
And that was what really like stepped me back about like, wow, there's a whole world that it takes to help people trust you as a person. And one of those things is like making sure you chum the waters and that they know it's coming before it comes.
That's so true, because, we always talk about collaboration and how important it is that everybody has their input and feels like they have their input. And so if you have the boss or the client kind of in that role of yes or no without actually having input on the idea, how are you going to get them excited about it to want to pursue it? And how do you know that it's the best that it could possibly be, right?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. It's really important that like ideas aren't ever owned by us, and they're not ours. It's got to be communal. Both literally and figuratively, meaning like people need to see their fingerprints on things. And so when you socialize a big idea early and you're talking to somebody and you get their feedback, on one hand, people will play their cards. So like they'll tell you in private, why they wouldn't like the idea. So you have the chance to address it and think about it. But also when you get their feedback and they have good ideas, you can actually incorporate that into your idea, and you can incorporate their feedback, even if it's pretty much the idea you originally had, you can help them see how their feedback fits into it. And it should have everybody's fingerprints all over it. Like, the best ideas aren't ours, and by the time we pitch it, it's something bigger than us. And that's where, ego comes in, which Lord knows I've had my challenges with in my past. But it's like learning to let go that, like, it's not about me winning, it's not about me getting the gold star. It's about shipping great work. And getting that mentality is a big shift.
And that's one of the hardest things, right? It's so hard to put that ego aside, especially when you're so married to an idea. And it's like, this is this amazing idea. I came up with this. I want to get this out into the world. And to be able to say, but I think you also have something to contribute to this, and this can evolve to something new, is really cool. And something that you touched on kind of reminds me of this book that I've read called Never Split the Difference. I don't know if you've read it.
No, I haven't.
It's pretty cool. It's actually totally not related to marketing, although, I mean, it's human psychology, so I guess it is. Yeah. But it's written by this former FBI hostage negotiator. And it's all these negotiation tactics. And they talk about how humans are, by nature, irrational beings. So it's like, how do you manage that? But one of the key principles in that book is your goal in a negotiation, and in this context, in coming up with an idea, is not to get a yes. It's actually to get to no, because then you know where their parameters are and you know where they stand. And then you can work from there. A yes is kind of like, you don't know if you just oversold it or what, but when you get a no, then it's like, okay, now I know we can build off of this. I know why it's a no.
That's such an interesting perspective. I haven't read the book. I'll need to. It's similar to me. One of the lessons that I learned in my career that a really amazing mentor and former boss taught me was it's not about yes, it's about not yet. And that was the other one, which is very similar, which was that, like, if it's a really great idea or a big idea, it's going to take you a whole lot more than one meeting to sell this thing through. And it's going to be iterative, it's going to evolve. And so it's really important that when you're in the room and having those conversations, that you're really just fighting to not get no. And you're just trying to get someone who's going to say, well, not yet. And it gives you the chance to come back again and come back again. But that goes back to the ego part, is you also have to humble yourself to realize, one, a whole lot of great ideas never ship, right? Every creative knows that. Like, we can all point to, like, the best stuff in our portfolio that never saw the light of day. And that's the first reality. And then the other reality is that, like, okay, the stuff that is going to ship, maybe I'm successful 30-40% of the time. It's going to be a grind to get there. And I'm going to get a lot of not yets before I get that yes. So I'll have to read that book. It sounds pretty similar.
And how do you gauge an idea in terms of, obviously, I mean, when we're speaking in the context of marketing, there has to be some sort of business objective, right? So part of it, I think one of the challenges, especially from a creative perspective, is being able to say, like, okay, I love this idea, but is this what the business actually needs? Is this what the marketing, the strategic objective is? How do you actually weigh out an idea and say, like, this is worth pursuing, this aligns with our objective, or this is just a creative project?
So first off, that's so true, and that's absolutely critical. One of the things I talk about a lot with people when I talk about selling big ideas is, are you doing it for you, or are you doing it for the organization? And you got to be really, like, sobering with yourself to figure that out, because sometimes you love it and you would love to do it, and sure, it's a good idea, but the organization doesn't need it. And so for me, I'm a little bit narrow in my definition. The last few organizations that I've worked for have all been tuition-dependent institutions, or an ad agency that supported a tuition-dependent institution within the higher education space, which basically means they're all really focused on revenue. And so for me, I have a really sobering definition, which is like, if it's a big idea that doesn't make money, I'm really not sure it's a big idea. It sounds like it's just another line on the expense, side of things. And so to me, big ideas make money. And so for me, when I come into an organization, I always focus on the big ideas that drive revenue first. And there's, of course, other ideas that are, like, brilliantly on brand, that are the right thing to do, and they're honorable, but there's no real ROI, and there's no way to measure it. And I'm not saying you don't do those things, but you do those things after you've made your boss money.
Right.
You focus first and foremost on growing the business and growing the organization, because, like, nothing snowballs faster than success. And so I always come in and I talk about, like, how can we drive performance to the bottom line, which means really, honestly, outperform this year's annual budget. And whatever the budget is, let's beat it. And to me, it's focusing on those initiatives first, rather than chasing some of our creative itches that we want to scratch. All those other things we'll get to later. But let's focus first on that, because if we can, the other thing is it's so much easier to pitch an idea that's revenue generating rather than just a cost. Because who doesn't want to do something that's going to help drive revenue and create a healthier business?
For sure. Yeah, and I think that kind of goes back to where we started, which is like, how do you get that buy-in from those people around you? Yeah. And if you're actually generating revenue with the ideas that you're putting into the world, that kind of helps, right?
Yeah,
that
absolutely.
helps a lot.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing. And sometimes you don't always know how much, and so that's definitely a part of it. But exactly, it's focusing on the things that scratch their itches and solve their problems. Obviously, in a perfect organization with a great, healthy culture, we all have the same exact goal in mind. But when in doubt, default to your boss's goal. Default to their boss's goal. And hopefully they're the same. But whenever they're not, that's what to focus on. And to me, it's big ideas drive business, and they transform businesses. And it's hard to pitch them, and it's exhausting. But it's focusing on those that's going to increase your success rate, because it's really directly aligned, in an attributable way to what the bosses are looking for.
Definitely. And we're talking a lot about big ideas, but to kind of break down what that means, do you have an example of maybe one that really jumps out for you that you've been a part of like a big idea that was a home run for you?
Yeah, absolutely. So for me, came up through creative in the marketing world. I've worked in-house. I've worked at an outside agency, and I've built an in-house agency. And so for anybody who's been in the marketing creative world, they all know that like big ideas typically come in campaign pitches, and campaigns are typically like, multi-channel, multi-month or even multi-year large-scale marketing campaigns. So I've pitched literally dozens and dozens and dozens of them in my career. I've gotten some yeses, I've gotten some nos, but the biggest one ever that kind of really changed a lot of things for me in the organization was when I worked at Southern New Hampshire University in 2000. I worked there 2011 to 2015. Mm-hmm. And in 2012, I spent 7 months developing and pitching a bus tour ad campaign where we literally got in a bus and we drove across the country, and we personally delivered diplomas to online students who couldn't make it to graduation. And we filmed the whole thing like documentary style. Wow. And that's probably it was the biggest idea at that point in my career that I'd been a part of coming up with the team there. And it was also the most exhaustive process, because it took 7 months of an iterative pitching process before they finally approved it.
And so we're talking getting a full bus going. I'm sure you have the crew. You have to schedule all of these encounters, get that documented.
Yeah, and we did all that before they approved it. And so, one of the things about big ideas is sometimes you have to do the work before you get to do the work. And so I'm old school in this way. At the last agency I was at in Utah, I was a big fan of spec work. I actually think that if you can't ask someone if big ideas are risky, and risk requires trust, you can't just ask someone to trust you. That trust is earned. And one of the ways it's earned is by helping someone see over the hill. Show them what you see. Don't just ask them to trust you. And so that means doing the work. So in the case of Southern New Hampshire, the idea was probably one of the only light bulb ideas I've ever had in my career. It was I literally saw a bus in my head, and it was like a visual. And worked with the team internally, but for 7 months, we literally we emailed 90,000 students. We went through this elaborate casting process. We built a map. We got a bus. It was actually an old tour bus with bunks. We wrapped it on the outside, and we went for literally 46 days. And we drove cross country with a DP and a director on the bus the whole time, and filmed the whole thing. And came back with hundreds of hours of footage and tried to make something of this. And we were really lucky that what we captured was gold. And so when you got great stuff in the can, it's doable and you can pull it off. But we had to do all that work up front. And I tell people, you got to do the work before you get to do the work sometimes. And they never would have approved that. And then said, okay, go start and do it. We had to have the actual students picked out, the map picked out, the route, the full budget done, the bus lined up. And we were 3 weeks out of leaving and 48 hours before we needed the deposit on the bus to go through before they actually finally approved it.
So what was the actual kind of strategic objective for that campaign? What was the thought behind it?
So a great question. So we had unbelievable strategy going in. So like the best ideas are all built on great strategy. And we were in an intake meeting with a bunch of the internal folks, including the old CEOs, my old boss, and just a guy I absolutely admire and look up to. And I asked him this simple question. I said, what do you want to see in the next campaign that you haven't seen in the current one? What have we missed? And he said, I want people to know that we give a shit. And it was kind of a candid, off-the-cuff comment. I hope he doesn't mind of sharing it. And it was basically like we knew that we out-cared the competition, but we didn't know how to tell people. And so that was what we were tasked with. And so we had a lot of talk internally that you can't tell people you care more. It's kind of like you can't say you're high quality. Like as soon as you say you're high quality, we're like, okay, you're definitely low quality. So we gotta show it instead of tell it. And then we talked about the fact that like everybody says they care. So it's not really an ownable value proposition. And so if we can't own the value proposition, we can own the demonstration of it. If what we do isn't unique, then how we demonstrate it has to be. And so that was where the idea came up, was like, well, we have to do something that no one's ever done and show that we care in a way that no one's ever done it before, and in a manner that's ownable, that like after this day forward, no one can ever do that thing without like clearly having ripped us off.
For sure.
And so that was where like the diploma delivery idea was perfect, because it was like, we're going to get in a bus and literally, we showed up at people's houses in Florida and in Chicago. We delivered diplomas on the Santa Monica Pier. And this is like, we're from New Hampshire, and we drove all the way out here and people's families showed up and like we delivered it, and it wasn't a stunt for TV. Like it was like, we were really proud of these people and they were pumped to have this experience. And we filmed it and we didn't even know how we were going to cut it. We didn't know if we were going to get commercials out of it or not, or web videos. Like we just knew that it was like so big and so audacious, and it was the right thing to do. And thankfully leadership, and that's who deserves all the credit in my opinion, said yes, because the truth is that like, big ideas are hard, but approving big ideas are harder because it's like all risk and questionable reward to leadership. And so it really kind of came together and came to life. And it's just a campaign I'm still proud of today.
It's awesome hearing you talk about that too, because you really touched on something that's like our golden rule around here, which is show, don't tell. And I think you said it exactly. The minute you say you're high quality, it's like, okay, you're not high quality. And I think that's what's so important when you talk about like documentary style work or just campaigns that are really home runs. Yeah. It's not necessarily saying like, we're awesome, we're this, we're innovators. It's actually showing what that looks like. And, with the goal of showing that we give a shit, if you put out a campaign that the tagline, we care, we give a shit, what is that really going to do versus actually showing it?
Completely. And people, these days, we're so inundated with ads, no one really trusts anything, right? And so from the consumer perspective, we're asking them to go out on a limb here. And at least in the higher ed world, it's one of the most expensive purchases of your life. Outside of buying a home, and maybe if you're lucky and you buy a heck of a car. But other than that, going back to school is the most expensive purchase of your life. And so there's a lot of trust involved in that. And so to me, I'm so with you, like the documentary style, I'm such a believer in, which is that one of the jobs of a great marketing team and a great big idea usually is to remove ourselves from the process. So like let's not have ourselves wedged in between the organization and its message and the consumer. And if we can remove ourselves as much as possible and just document, people still know it's an ad, it still says promoted or sponsored on Facebook, like they get it, but it's also like a real story, and it's an interesting story, and it's still worth their time. And people would much rather watch things like that than, a 30-second commercial with actors.
Which is so critical now when you're talking about, OTT replacing cable and all of these changes where, just shoving a message down someone's throat just is not an effective strategy anymore.
Yeah, completely. It's so true. And I mean, like, I'm a huge fan of OTT. I think it's such a captive audience. It blows my mind that OTT is still cheaper, literally per 1,000 than traditional television, in the sense that, like, someone just clicked to play that on their Roku, because, like, it's the literally the intent is there versus someone put their TV on or their DVRs on and you don't know. And so delivering a really interesting message is, like, so critical. Yeah. And it's just funny you mentioned OTT, because, like, I feel like OTT is like the Wild West. Some of the creative is so bad right now, and it's like such an awesome place to come in and just like outperform the competition just by being better. Like, we just do better work and therefore stand out. It's just not as cluttered as like cable is currently.
Yeah, for sure. And I could keep running with you down that, but really quick, kind of going back to this campaign.
Yeah.
how did it perform? What was kind of the result? So you got it approved. You did the actual work first. You got it approved. What was kind of the result there?
So we traveled across the country for 46 days, and we met real students and alumni, filmed this whole thing, came back and ended up cutting 7 TV commercials, launching a fully integrated campaign, and it was the highest performing stuff we've ever shipped. And so I was really lucky during my time at Southern New Hampshire. It was incredible growth. From 2011 to 2015, we grew from 7,000 students to 70,000 students, fastest growing university ever. And the bus tour was not the reason for that. The bus tour was a component of that. The branding that we did was, one leg of a stool, and there's many other legs around it. But that campaign, immediately overnight outperformed anything we'd ever done. They were still running that spot on and off 4 years later, 5 years later, because it still was performing so well. They were just overnight really successful. And the most important thing to me was internally that campaign changed the culture completely. Overnight, the culture just went up a whole nother level because people were like, I can't believe we're really doing this. We're really putting our money where our mouth is. And it was just incredible. And so, the university was the fastest growing university ever. I think I was employee 117. When I left, there was almost 1,500. It was just a gangbusters crazy growth. It was awesome just to be on the ride with so many talented folks.
That's incredible. And obviously, that's just one. I know you have a lot of big campaigns, in your past. I'm curious just in terms of when you're actually setting out to launch a new campaign, what does that process look like? I know you have, a team that you've built now, this in-house agency model. Yeah. What is your approach in terms of whether it's the process, or how do you say, okay, we need a new campaign. Here's our business objective. What next? Yeah, you got it. So there's kind of 2 parallel answers. I have a brand development process that's essentially 4 phases that's really focused first on research, second on strategy, third on creative concepts, and fourth on the production of a campaign. Every agency has that in some components. I'll tell you a few of the things that I think are a little different. I focus first and foremost on align. So my first 3 is align, socialize, and pitch. So align is really about making sure that are we on the same page with our clients and our partners and everyone else? And if we're not, I really don't move forward. We focus all of our efforts on that. If you try to move fast up front, man, do you move slow in the back? Yeah. And so we do the groundwork. Then we socialize ideas early and often. And so I think it's been hard for some folks who've worked with me historically. But at this stage of my career, I will shop ideas. Today in a meeting with one of my biggest clients, a president, I already socialized our campaign for next year verbally, and we don't have a brief yet. We don't have the answer. I'm just saying here's this general direction that we're thinking. This idea, it's a loose idea, and I'm already socializing some stuff. I'm trying to get feedback throughout this whole process. Wow. And then when we move into pitch, it's not pitching this big elaborate campaign. It's pitching this this little idea. You pitch ideas and not execution. That's another mistake people make, is they jump right to execution. And to me, there's always flaws in execution. You never get execution right perfectly. So you pitch the idea. At National University last year, the campaign we pitched was a few slides, and it was called My 30. And the National University has 30-day classes, which is pretty unique. And we talk a lot about what can you do in 30 days. We're going to take this big thing going back to school, and we're going to make it feel really achievable. And so the campaign was My 30. Mm-hmm. We're going to follow 30 students over 30 days to capture a day in the life and really bring to life the life in the day, and show people what are amazing, real, everyday heroes doing in their lives while they're also going back to school. So we're going to go out, travel the country, we're going to follow them and wake up with them, go to bed with them, spend a day. Yeah. That's basically was the pitch. It was there wasn't this, we then built out a book eventually over a couple of weeks, and it was this big 60-page book with all the executions, and here's what we're doing for Facebook. But up front, it was that's the idea. We'll pitch the idea first, then we'll pitch the execution later. And those are just a few of the areas where I approach it a little bit differently and more iterative now. And I learned that the hard way, because I've left people out of the process. And when you leave them out, man, it's just so much harder to get the football down the field. Yeah, and hearing you, just that first piece, align, get everybody aligned. I think that's one, just personally, I've had to learn that lesson over and over. And, sometimes you get 3 out of 4 people on board and it's a green light, and you're like, yes, the idea is good, let's just run with it. Yeah. And then inevitably, 6 weeks down the line, or you're ready to wrap up project, and it's that one person that's holding everything from going. And it's if we would have just got everyone bought in the start, we would be shipped by now. This thing would be live. Yeah, completely. I had one example that some of the best work we ever did at the agency I was at in Utah was for one university
in the Midwest, and they turned down some of the best work we ever did. And I found out later that the person there had actually told someone that no matter what we pitched, they were going to say no. And it was because they had felt so left out of the process. Wow. And that was so on me. And I still to this day feel bad for my team and the organization. I let a lot of people down because I was still just like so gung-ho on like, this is such great work. Like, who wouldn't love this great work? And it's more complicated than that. And I really should have slowed down and focused on people and not just the process. And caught those things, because one of the things I talk a lot about is obviously process. But there's things that don't show up in a process sheet, which matter, like just texting the client and checking in, or, bumping into somebody in a hallway, or changing the process for someone because they need something different. Maybe they do need a tissue session, or maybe you should call up and preview something, or maybe you shouldn't because they're too busy and they don't want to be involved. Like, so often we take these like cookie cutter processes and we drop them on multiple organizations, but like the truth is like everybody's different.
You have to understand each person, right?
Totally. And I think I didn't do that in a lot of ways in my previous job. And I thought that we could like fit everybody into our mold. And it just doesn't work that way.
And you mentioned that like process is great, but it's also about the people. And I know that you've obviously, sitting here, I'm sure that you have times in your past that you can allude to, but sitting here, like, I think you're a pretty humble guy. The way that I've seen you just roll with ideas and be able to get everybody involved, I think that that's a really unique characteristic. And so I'm just curious in terms of, you've built out this in-house agency. What does that look like in terms of people versus process, and how do you kind of have the two symbiotically working together? And because I know that a lot of times if you push process too much, that can be limiting and even infuriating to the team that's working on it. But there's also value in process. So kind of where do you sit with that?
Completely. That's such a great question, man. And I appreciate I come off as humble. It's probably because I've been humbled so many times. I would say that it's a real balance. I'm lucky. The team I manage now is almost 70 people, 50 here in San Diego and 20 in Scottsdale, Arizona. And so when you run a large scale organization, the reality is process is critical. And so if you haven't ever read it, like Ray Dalio's book Principles is incredible. He talks a lot about process and how important that is. To me, there's two things. First, it's people first, then process. It's always people first. Be a good human being and take care of people, and listen and be thoughtful and like walk the floor and be available. All things that I did a really poor job of for a long time in my career. Like people first. Like just be a good person, because at the end of the day, this is still a job, and we still go home and we're like, we're only giving part of ourselves here, and we're a whole person. And so see the whole person, be kind. The other thing that's really important is you don't need to be like unwavering with process. You just have to be unwavering in documenting it. And what I mean is that like it's absolutely critical that you have a really quantifiable, demonstratable, communicatable like process for how you do everything. And it's important that you evolve that process. So, like we have a weekly agency ops meeting where we actually talk about our process and try to evolve it every single week. And we do that out in the open with anybody can weigh in, and we talk about to do. The thing is, though, it doesn't mean that we have to follow the process. It just means that if you ever don't follow the process, you need to know it and you need to have a reason why.
Interesting.
And so to me, that means everybody needs to know what the process is, and we follow the process. And then we might say that in this case, we don't think we should follow the process. We should do something else. But it's about being like a conscious, just consciously stepping outside of the process. The big problem is when people don't know, or when we have this issue. We asked a question this week. Well, what happens when someone's out? Who assigns this? And the answer is like, well, we don't really know. And we're like, well, it's been happening because like these people take vacations or they're out sick, it's been happening, but it's been happening organically. And so like let's document what it is. Let's tell everybody, and then in the future let's challenge it and change it. And so to me, you don't have to follow process, but like you have to document it and you have to teach to it, and people have to be aware of it. That to me is really critical. So that way we're just like really intentional if we ever don't follow it.
Yeah, interesting. And I mean, obviously there is a little bit of a proactive approach, but a lot of times I feel like processes can be very reactive. Like you said, you notice a pattern, you see something happening, and it's like, okay, how can we document this and then, enforce it? And I feel like one of the mistakes I made is I'm a part of kind of an entrepreneurs organization type thing, not actually entrepreneurs organization, but similar.
Yeah.
And there was a point in time where everyone was pushing systems, systematize your business. And so this was when I was first starting out this business, and I was like, okay, systems, all in, I'm doing it. And so I created all these systems, complex Google Docs, and then I realized like I hadn't even done enough work to figure out what actually worked or didn't work to actually create the process. Yep. So I feel like there has to be this little bit of a reactive approach or looking in hindsight and saying what worked, how can we replicate that?
Completely, yeah, it's so true. Yeah, and process, it can't be fixed, right? It has to be pliable and be able to bend. And the other thing is you'll never get it all right. So like one of the things I always talk about is at work, and people that work at least directly with me, they'll probably roll their eyes because they hear me say this so many times, is anytime there's an issue, then one of only two things happened. Either we didn't follow the process, or we did and the process didn't work. And so every mistake or issue we ever have, this didn't go out or this happened, then we can always say, well, it falls in only one of two columns. Did we follow the process? No, we didn't. Okay, well, that's a training issue. That means we need to get people up to speed. Did people know they didn't follow the process? Or it's like, well, yeah, we did, but it didn't work. It's because the process wasn't right in this situation because it's not good enough. So let's evolve it. And so to me, it's helping people think in those capacities. Yeah. And because the other part is like process teaches. And so through the evolution of designing process, and this is where like I really am like an ops guy. In my old age, I've become an ops guy. It helps you teach other people. So simplest world, like our world of video, we built out video in-house. We have 3 full-time videographers, but most of the folks in-house hadn't either ever worked with video or only had in limited capacities. And so helping them understand simple things like the majority of our videos are going to start with a rough cut, go to a first cut, go to a final cut. Here's what those things work. Here's the kind of feedback you give at each stage. Here's why we don't color correct right away. Yeah. And that, people don't know the whole video process, but they know those steps. And so it's like all of a sudden we've taken 70 people, and they have this like working knowledge where they can, provide value and be a partner to, the video production team. And again, they don't know the whole video process, but like that, it's enough that we've taken this complicated thing, which is video production, and we've made it like back of the napkin, easily explainable to someone who's never worked with it before.
And kind of understanding why, right? The why behind each piece. And I know that in your keynote, I really appreciated your shout out to the book Extreme Ownership, Jocko Willink.
Yeah, it's an awesome book.
I love the stuff that Jocko puts out, and I love that book, and I think it's one of the best leadership books. But that key component of if you're going to have a process or some sort of order of operations, but nobody understands why that is in place, then why would you expect anybody to buy into that and want to actually fulfill it and follow through? Yeah,
I absolutely love that book. You've written right here in San Diego. Leif Babin, the other co-author, I think he's the one who wrote in that, if your boss doesn't say yes, it's not your boss's fault. First, blame yourself. Man, is that hard? Because when it comes to selling big ideas, it's like if you go in the room and they don't say yes, like how often have we, and I'll just speak for myself, how often have I walked out of a room and be like, I can't believe they didn't say yes, they don't understand, and it's like I'm protecting that ego, and I'm trying to blame someone else when
they don't know what they're doing, they don't get it,
they don't understand, they have no idea, and it's like it is so easy to get caught in that trap. And it is the least productive place to be. It is a dark place to be, and it's just really dangerous. And it's all driven by your ego trying to protect yourself from the pain of self-reflection, which is, like realizing that like I could have done better, and there was more I could have done. Man, so that's where that book is just like so spot on. He's a great podcast too. I was actually listening to it this morning on the way to work. Just really, really great stuff.
And so on that, I mean, obviously, you said that that's a really unproductive place to be, which totally agree. How do you, though, with a team of 70, right?
Yeah.
How do you manage, let's say, there really is just a genuine disagreement of like, hey, I really think, ego aside, this is the best approach to move forward. How do you kind of reconcile those if there's kind of a disagreement there?
One of the most important things to me is to understand that that conflict can be healthy. And conflict is critical, and so part of conflict is having proper escalation processes. So like when I came into this role, there really wasn't much there, meaning we understand who's required to make which decisions. So like if there's a conflict within my team, I tell people all the time, you got to meet with each other first. Like we need to be like really interdependent and work well together and function as a highly functioning team. But it's okay if like an account director disagrees with a channel expert and they want to do something different. But what they need to do is bring in the head of accounts and the head of marketing services. And if they disagree, they need to bring in me. There's this weird passive aggressive kind of mindset in a lot of corporate cultures where like people say like never bring a problem to your boss. I'm like, I like completely disagree with that. Like, that's why your boss is there. Like, solve all the stuff that you could solve on your own. Like, bring me the things where you do need assistance. And one of those would be like, the two of us disagree on what we should do. Can you come in and can we mediate this and make a decision as a group? And it's important to know who makes a decision. So ultimately, like within my world, it's going to be, I have to make the call. I'll always delegate decisions to my direct reports and to theirs whenever possible.
Right.
But if two of them disagree and, I'm both of their supervisors, like I'll make the call. And so, even within my world, if I disagree with a client or a partner, like I know the hierarchy, which is that like, marketing is a service unit in my world, and like we are in the service business, and that means like I support right now 4 independent universities that I do the marketing for as part of an in-house agency, and our agency has a lot of recommendations, but we're not the president of those universities.
Right.
And so push comes to shove, I'm going to do whatever the president says because they're the CEO of that business.
Yeah.
Up until that point, we're going to escalate it all the way up if we really feel strongly about something. We'll pick our battles, which I think people a lot of times do a poor job of, and like which are the hills you're willing to die on. But to me, there's like no shame. And I literally had someone over here this on a production actually a couple years ago. I was on the call with someone and I just said, it's absolutely okay that you disagree with me. And I want you to know I totally understand your point of view. I disagree with you. Like, do you understand my point of view? And they're like, yes, they did. I said, then let's just feel good about escalating this. Like, let's bring this to somebody else and let them make the decision and see if they can help us through this conversation, because clearly we understand each other. The only time you never want to bring something up the ladder is if you haven't taken the time to understand both sides of it and you're just kind of like talking past each other. But to me, like, I think escalation is a powerful tool that is really underutilized.
And that's so critical too, because it sounds like a big component of that is even just sometimes just getting that third party kind of outside perspective.
Yeah.
It sounds like that's a big piece of what you're talking about. And I think especially when you have those sort of disagreements, something that I've found is really helpful is just stepping back and looking at the 10,000 foot view and being like, well, what's our initial objective here anyways?
Yeah.
And sometimes just the reminder of that is like, oh, you're right. Well, actually for the objective, I think your idea will work.
That's such a good point. And going back to, like, what's the objective? What's the brief say? Like, why are we doing this in the first place? And then what do we have to do? And what can we also sometimes chunk out in stages? And like, maybe we'll do. One of the things, you talk about process, man, there's a couple people who work for me, I can just like see them rolling their eyes already if they ever watch this. I always talk about there's the 4 Ds to decision making. Anytime a decision presents itself to you, you have 4 possible decisions. You can either do it, decide not to do it, you can delegate, or you can defer. And defer means we're just going to wait and decide later. Delegate means I'm going to let someone else make the call, and then you do it or you don't. And defer is a really interesting one that like people defer way too often unintentionally, meaning they have the meeting and nothing comes of it. And that's really unproductive to a company culture. But deferring proactively is powerful, meaning like, great, we brought this up. It's interesting. How about we just wait a month? Like, we're just going to move on and do this part of the production. We're going to do this part of the project. We're going to make that phase 2 and we're going to deal with it later. And like half the time those things solve themselves because the campaign takes off or something moves in a certain direction or people get bought into the idea, because they see it come to life, and all of a sudden, the thing that was the big hurdle or the big obstacle in the way of getting something sold or shipped suddenly isn't. So it's like sometimes you can just cut that barnacle off and like push that thing a little bit further down.
That's interesting. That's so kind of against common knowledge of what you hear.
You think you
rarely
have to, like,
hear like,
it all.
let's table this, let's put this off.
To me it's about like being really intentional and conscious that like, are we gonna like just deal with this later? Are we all on the same page? Okay, because the most frustrating thing is to like want the decision and then not make it.
Yeah.
And so to me, if you can be like really forward about that and say like, we don't need to make this decision today, there's no shame in not making it. You know what I mean?
That's a good reminder for me, because that's something I fall victim to a lot. Or victim, I'm no victim in this, I'm guilty, but just, a lot of times if we're trying to come up with an idea or something, I find myself a lot of times just, we have to have this decided now. Like today, we are not leaving this meeting. That's like, I feel like that's a famous phrase of me is we are not leaving this meeting until we have a decision.
Yeah.
And so that's a good reminder. Thank you.
You're welcome. And sometimes you got to be tough like that. But that's only if the decision's holding you back, right? Versus if the decision's holding back your feeling of productivity or progress, that's different than real progress. And so, cool. I mean, that's I don't know. It's an interesting dichotomy, right?
Yeah. I mean, nothing's black or white, right?
Yeah.
It's always in the gray area. And I think obviously, sometimes you have to get things done. You have to have the ball rolling, but sometimes some time can really do a miracle on whatever problem it is you're tackling.
Yeah, completely. Especially because, clearer heads will prevail. And a lot of times there's emotion involved in this stuff. And like, we're emotional creatures. And so when you can kind of sober that up a little bit, it almost always helps.
Yeah. I love that. So speaking of kind of going against the grain, something that I prepped you a little bit for, but I always love to explore just kind of out of my own sheer curiosity, is I'm a huge fan of contrarian beliefs.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, in terms of the marketing landscape, obviously, it's 2019, so you don't have to look farther. Blogs, there are courses, there's influencers, there's no shortage of information out there in the marketing world, whether it's for digital, creative, whatever it is. I'm curious if you have anything that you've seen as far as trending topics or pieces of advice that you feel might be misguided or steering people the wrong direction, or if you have any sort of contrarian belief as to, hey, this might be kind of out of what you expect, but this is what I truly feel.
Yeah. I have a few. First off, it's an awesome question. And I really, really love that. So let me just rattle a few and see if any of them you want to talk about any of them. So one of them is definitely that I'm a big believer in long form video. I have seen 7, 8, 9 minute videos on Facebook getting hundreds of thousands of views. The highest engaged content we've ever done at National University has been long form video, not short.
Now you're speaking my language.
Yeah, I think people are just wrong about that. I'll tell you, web content I still think is shorter, not longer, and everybody's moving to trying to give the consumer everything they want. And in many industries, they're probably right. But in mine, where our world is marketing is pushing an RFI, a request for information form, less is still more. And it so the big broad web experience that answers every question, not interested, doesn't work for me. I'm really not a fan of display advertising, but at this point, I think most people aren't in 2019. I think those are probably a few that to me stand out. And then the only one I'll mention is marketing, is I absolutely hate slogans and taglines. And I think in almost every case, it's just grandiose BS scratching a client's itch, and it's not actually resonating at all with the marketplace. And I think most brands don't need and should not waste any real estate on a tagline or a slogan at all. And they should just focus on a broader brand experience. I don't think branding is cookie cutter creative. It's saying the same thing everywhere. So to me, that's an area where I definitely am not bought in at all.
So what do you see in terms of, obviously a lot of times the tagline is used to further solidify that brand kind of real estate in the mind share. What do you see as that either alternative, or why do you kind of feel that the tagline is or slogan is ineffective?
So one reason is, to me, that the tagline or slogan is just repetitive, and if you're really having multiple touches and multiple impressions across multiple channels, it just gets old and stale really quickly.
Yeah.
I'll also say, to be fair, I live in a CTA, like a call to action world. If you're just truly a big brand that has no call to action, maybe it's different. But for me, I'm going to focus on that CTA, which is to get you to the website to learn more. I don't want to get you to learn more and then throw some random tagline out at you. It's just not necessary. I want the last thing I say to be the most important thing I say, which is, where do you go to get more information? And then finally, I just think it's that the consumer is just savvier today, and they're getting multiple touches all over the place. And I think that brand consistency is not anymore just about graphic identity or a slogan or tagline or repetitive copy. It's about a feeling. I can tell you when I see a Yeti spot. Yeti's one of the strongest brands in our space right now. I think, I can tell if it's a Yeti commercial without having to see it. There's this campaign called New Mexico True, which is a New Mexico tourism campaign. Some of the best creative, I think, has come out in the last couple of years from a really small shop in Santa Fe. I can see those ads and hear those ads, and I know what it is, even though it's different images, different copy, and different music. But it's the consistency is there. So I think brand consistency is more substantive than a slogan is. And a slogan made sense when you were just buying a print ad or buying a billboard. But when it comes to so much multimedia, to me, it's a little more intangible these days. And I think a lot of slogans or taglines are a little bit dated. And it's I can't really think of one that I've heard recently that I think stands out as being really a value add.
It's something that's really hard to get right, even if you do it right.
Yeah.
A slogan or tagline, almost every time you say it out loud, it's actually that sounds kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, but then you say it enough and you're like, just do it. Oh, it's perfect. Look, it is. If you're Nike, if you're Nike, don't drop it, man. You got something right. But if you're a small to mid-sized brand that's trying to break out, Don't stress about that. That's not what matters. Like I've just seen so much bad creative with slogans tagged on the end, where it's like, man, if you just spend a little bit more time using real customers or real people in your ads, telling great stories, providing value, moving people, like creating emotional, engaging content that actually matters. Focus on that and worry a little bit less about what you slap on the end card.
That's the show, don't tell, right?
100%.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, Seth, man, I really appreciate you doing this. I thought this was an awesome conversation, and I'm sure we'll definitely have to have you back for some more if you're up for it. And
yeah, anytime. I appreciate you having me down and chatting with this. I love talking about these topics, and this was a great conversation. So I appreciate the chance.
Cool. And if anyone wants to get in touch or find out more about what you're up to, is there anywhere you want to point them?
Yeah, you can find me online. Most places is at Seth Odell. At least on Twitter, I got sethodell.com online. I'm not as active on most of my stuff as I used to be, but I'm still there. So, find me on whatever platform you like, holler at me. I'm always down to connect and chat with folks.
And rumor is you might be starting a podcast of your own soon.
So that's the rumor. I got put on the spot at AMA about it. I have this belief that every marketer needs to have a side hustle, that it's critical to like scratch that itch outside of the office. So that way you can deal with the grind and the patience required to sell ideas internally. And so my mind has been a desire to do a podcast called Conversations with Creative People. So I'm looking to launch that this summer in 2019. My girlfriend's made me promise to do it. She's already harping on me about not moving fast enough, which is great. So it is coming and I will get it done.
Love it. Well, I can't wait to hear it.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.
Thanks, Seth. Thanks so much for checking out this episode. I hope you liked it. I hope you got a lot out of it. If so, it would mean the world to me if you could jump over to Apple Podcasts and leave an honest rating and review for the show. That helps us get this out to more marketing leaders like yourself.